Hello, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Legal and Finance Committee for the City of Rapid City on November 13th, 2019. First up on the agenda is roll call and determination of quorum. Robin, when you're ready. Here?
Here.
Thank you. Next up is the adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt.
Moved by Nordstrom, second by Lehman. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, and the agenda is adopted. Now it's time for general public comment, a time for the members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. I have no general public comment forms, and so general public comment is now closed. We go on to consent items number 1 through 12. Public comment is now open on those items. Seeing no, I have no forms on that, and seeing no one that seems to want to talk on 1 through 12, we'll go on to the committee present and see if anybody would like to have an item removed for special consideration. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 of them, 4, 9, and 12.
I see no other lights. Could I have a motion to adopt the remainder of the agenda with the exception of 4, 9, and 12?
So moved.
Moved by Modrick, second by Lewis. And all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And the consent items are approved with the exception of item number 4, 9, and 12. So we go to item 4. Fire Department, approve resolution number 2019-087, a resolution to write off uncollectible ambulance billing accounts. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may direct my comments or question to Chief Seals, please.
Yep.
Chief, we want to get beyond the headlines on this here, and you wrote a very good letter explaining all the reasons why we're doing the uncollectibles or writing off all the uncollectibles. Could you give us a summary? I thought the numbers that you were reciting was a very good explanation of.
Sure. We typically do these write-offs once to twice a year. Last year we did it once, and this is the only one that we'll do this year as well. This amount is a little bit less than last year's. The amount is large at $790,000 and change. Just to put it into perspective, this represents 1,190 ambulance tickets or ambulance bills spanning from 2005 to 2019. Of those 1,190, 827 are due to the 6-year statute of limitations has expired, and the debt is uncollectible according to the debt collection agency that we have already sent that to. 316 of those are due to the patient being deceased with no estate. 21 are mandatory write-offs per Medicaid. 18 are due to bankruptcies. 5 are due to the patient being incarcerated, and 3 are due to mandatory write-offs per private insurance. I know this uncollectible debt, a lot of people don't understand why we write it off. We do follow all the regulations provided to us and best practices with business. And so it's kind of ridiculous to keep that on the books thinking that it's going to be income someday when it's not. And it's also ridiculous to waste any more money trying to collect on that debt that we know is not going to be collectible. And so this is a way to purge it off the books, off the accounts receivable.
Just one more follow-up question on that, just to clarify for the public, this is not tax dollars, it's a user fee.
That is correct. Our ambulance is an enterprise fund, and so no taxpayer dollars has ever gone in to fund the ambulance side of our business. The budget is around $4 million a year in that ambulance enterprise fund. It supports 37 employees and all the equipment, all of that. And so the ambulance the enterprise fund has to make that money each year in order to spend that money.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
I guess I have a question too, Chief. So the $790,000 or thereabouts is actually budgeted, that these costs are going to come up bi-yearly or whatever, they come up twice.
It's an unfortunate cost of doing business when you're in this type of a business, that you are going to have people that either are deceased or that don't pay their bill for one reason or another. And like I mentioned in the memo, and the memo did get attached to today's meeting, so if anybody want to look that up. But as I mentioned in there, you know, people complain that the ambulance bills are too expensive, but we got a lot of people that don't pay their bill, therefore it's kind of a vicious cycle of one leads to the other. So.
Thank you. We have a light from Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question for Chief Seals, if I may. So, Chief, just for partially, and correct me if I'm wrong, if memory serves me on this, part of the reason we have a problem with the collection is these people are paid, when people take an ambulance ride and their insurance pays it, they pay it directly to the insured person, correctly? Is that correct?
Some do that way, and then it's on the honor system whether the patient pays us. So that is part of the issue as well.
And so part of it's a statewide problem that we're not allowed to negotiate directly with the insurance companies at an ambulance service, correct?
Correct.
So remember that when you're talking to your legislatures, folks, if you're upset about this, part of this is because the state law doesn't allow us to do that. Is that correct?
That is part of the problem.
So it's not just an issue here, it's part, we're left as a municipality to have to deal with the situation and write this off eventually if people don't pay their bill. So, thank you.
Good comments, everyone. Lisa Modrick.
Madam Chair, may I make a motion to approve resolution number 2019-087 to write off the uncollectible ambulance billing accounts?
Okay, motion by Modrick, second by Lehman. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. On to item number 9, approve the addition of suspension and debarment policies and procedures to the city's uniform grant guidance policies/procedures. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for our Chief Financial Officer, Pauline Sumption. Pauline, the memo that's attached to this explains it pretty well, but I think this is something, again, for the public to understand what disbarment or debarment and suspension actually means, and give the public a little presentation on why this originated.
So this came forward as a result of our 2018 audit. It was one of our comments or our findings that the auditors found when it came to our federal grant dollars. Basically what happens is if you're doing any purchasing with federal dollars, you're supposed to make sure that they haven't been suspended or debarred from doing business with the federal government. And so basically this requirement will just make those departments that receive federal funding to go on and make sure that their vendor, whoever that is not listed on the SAMS.gov website showing that they've either been suspended or disbarred. Or debarred. Sorry, disbarred is lawyers.
I have the same tendency. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Pauline. Pauline, so I saw that, as I read it, anybody under $25,000 doesn't fall under this category of being debarred or not allowed to do business because of debarment?
If the purchase is under $25,000, it's considered a micro purchase, and that is not, it doesn't have to comply with this part of it. It's just $25,000 or greater.
Okay, thank you. Need a motion? Motion by Lewis, second by Lehman. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And the motion carries. Moves us on to item number 12. Authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign the First Amendment to contract for construction of public improvements through private developer for tax increment district number 78. And the chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question, I believe, does this go to you, Pauline? No? Or goes over to Wade? Hi. Good afternoon, Wade. This question has to do with all the red numbers that are showing up in the list that we have over here, but my primary question has to do with the moving of the $265,521.79, moving that around so they can do the gravity line over there. If the public will notice that the first column is 0, but we had to move some things around to get this 265,000 and a half. Can you explain how that process works or why we need to do that?
Sure. The sewer line wasn't included in the original project plan. It was contemplated, I think, that we were going to do a lift station instead. So you saw it 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago at your council meeting, a project plan amendment where that was approved. So this is really cleanup of the agreement, more or less, to make the agreement match with the project plan, so.
And I think it's a very good concept, what they're putting together out there on this. So having that ability to move the funds around within the TIF process is something that's really needed, especially in a case, this is a classic example why transfers of funds from one line item to another needs to take place. So this demonstrates the need for that to continue on, so I really support this. And if we get the motion to move this forward, I'll be supportive of it, because it's a good thing that's going to be happening for this area, this region of the development. Thank you. I yield.
Need a motion?
Motion to approve.
Moved by Modrick, second by Lewis. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, and the motion carries. That's the end of the consent calendar. We go on to non-consent items. We have public comment open now on items 13 through 16. Rachel, would you like to comment now, or do you want to wait until we get to the item? I think maybe speak before we talk about the item. Is that okay with the committee? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So 13 is introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6371 regarding supplemental appropriation number 8 for 2019. Moved by Lewis, second by Lehman. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And the motion carries. Number 14, second reading and recommendation of ordinance number 6367 regarding supplemental appropriation number 7 for 2019. Moved by Lehman, second by Lewis. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. That brings us to number 15, community development, and I will call up Rachel Caesar to make comments on this, as she had a speaker request form for this item. Please state your name and your address, please.
Now, I've never been at this podium before, so this is kind of exciting for me.
It's very exciting, so take your time.
So, Rachel Caesar, 3418 Nicholas Court, Rapid City.
Okay.
So I just have a couple comments on this ADU ordinance. It's something that I know in the working meetings that we had quite a while ago, I probably was a little more vocal than, than some. But I just had a couple points that I wanted to make on this ordinance, and I'll try to keep it brief. First, I read a study this morning published in the American Economic Journal of Macroeconomics, talking about housing flexibility and its economic impact on communities. And I thought it was kind of pertinent. So if you give me just a moment to kind of explain this, it's basically, this study was talking about how if we're a little bit more lax with our housing policy and land use policy, we can actually open up the door for more housing for more people to fit, and it'll actually increase, the ability of us to attract people to our city. And I know that those are issues that we're all really concerned about, as citizens. I'm sure you guys as city council members are as well. So here's one quote. If a city with accommodating housing supply experiences productivity growth, local employment rises, and workers in other cities benefit. If instead the city has restrictive housing supply, the reallocation of jobs is limited, and productivity growth in the city is dissipated by the higher cost of housing. So this study goes on to say that they looked at 3 cities specifically, just because they were just kind of picking some cities to kind of do an economic analysis. And they found that if these 3 cities, New York, San Jose, and San Francisco, relaxed their land use restrictions, they could actually increase the national GDP by 3.7%. That's huge. So they averaged that out to, I assume, all workers, and it was $3,600 per person in the United States. That if those 3 cities relaxed their land use policies in certain ways, that's how much our economy as a nation could grow. And I think that that would apply to Rapid City too. That if we can actually encourage more people to come to Rapid City by having, a little bit more lax land use policies. And I think this ADU ordinance amendment is one of those ways. Now, a lot of people look at this and think about affordable housing. I look at this and I think about, and that is extremely important. I don't want to underplay that. I look at kind of my demographic of early 30-somethings who maybe want to move here for their work. I know a lot of my friends are here for just a short time and then they move on somewhere else because that's part of their career trajectory. They don't want to buy a house, but they also don't want to spend $1,000 a month in apartments. And so when I see, you know, these ADUs, I actually think of them, you know, like this isn't something that's going to cause a problem in neighborhoods. So, and then I just want to point out something that was brought to my attention. So when it passed in the Planning Commission on Thursday, 6-3, two of the people who were against it, one was against it was because he said that this isn't restrictive, or it's too restrictive. You know, that we need to have, you know, more limitations on what you can do. And another person said that they wouldn't support it because it's not restrictive enough. And so I think we have to kind of look at that and see, well, maybe this is actually kind of a happy medium. You know, if most of the opposing people can't agree on why they oppose it, maybe we should pay attention to that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Caesar, one point of clarification here. You are on the Planning Commission, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I didn't read this into the record yet, so I should do that before we go on to other comments. So, first reading and introduction of ordinance number 6310, request by the City of Rapid City to consider an application for an ordinance amendment to allow for accessory dwelling units in residential districts by amending Title 17 of the Rapid City Municipal, and I think code is missing. So that's what we're talking about here, and Chair recognizes Ken Young.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Just like to take a few minutes to give some comments and then turn some time over to Sarah Hansel and Vicki Fisher for making a presentation on this item. So I appreciate Rachel coming forward today. I didn't expect that, but I did want to emphasize or underline a comment that she made. This item has come before the Planning Commission twice, both times coming out of recommended approval. Both times having a bit of a split vote, but the point that she made, and I was planning on emphasizing that, was that the reasons are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And so I really feel that all the time that we have spent on this over the last couple of years with our open houses, our work sessions, a lot of media coverage, there's been a lot of public participation on this. We feel like we refined this down to a good proposal. This is a good middle ground proposal. It's not super restrictive, but it's not overly restrictive. And so with that, I would like to, well, just again emphasize it meets the objectives of our comprehensive master plan. It meets many of the objectives that we have in various areas and plans of the city. And it is something that is needed. It is one of the strong components, comprehensive or the targeted strategies that we had in our recently approved affordable housing policy. So we're ready for this. It's time for Rapid City to have legally permitted accessory dwelling units.
Thank you. So now we'll turn it over to Ms. Hansel and Ms. Fisher to speak about, or maybe it's just Sarah that'll be giving the presentation, but thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Hansel, Division of Long Range Planning. I have a brief presentation. I just want to introduce what an accessory dwelling unit is for anyone who's not familiar in the audience or watching. Highlight some of the policy reasons. What are the driving factors for why this is an important policy for the city to take in order to improve housing conditions? And then briefly give an overview of what's in the ordinance. What are the criteria that we've created that establishes this middle ground for how this ADU policy can help Rapid City and kind of meet needs and be not too restrictive and also not too lax. So for anyone not familiar, this is an accessory dwelling unit. It's essentially an additional living space that has its own separate eating, sleeping, and sanitation facilities that fits functionally and aesthetically really well within a lot that would generally otherwise only be a single-family home. There's a lot of different terminology related to these units. You know, they're referred to as granny flats, mother-in-law units, backyard cottages. The list really can go on and on. They are quite common in communities. They were developed very frequently in neighborhoods, particularly in the pre-war eras. As single-family ownership became more prominent after World War II, and there were communities all across the country started changing their zoning regulations to be a little bit more restrictive towards multiple family occupancies. And with that change is when we start seeing ADUs being removed from allowed uses in zoning districts. Now, fast forward in time, communities all across the country are responding to housing crises. We're trying to focus on our smart growth and focusing on our infill infrastructure. And as a result, once again, all across the nation, communities are starting to peel back these restrictions and really acknowledging these as important living units within neighborhoods. Here's a few photographic examples of what they can look like. These are not examples from Rapid City, but they kind of show how they fit in with single-family homes, either in an attic or as a small detached structure in the backyard or as an addition. They really take several formats. In Rapid City, we think that there's probably quite a few basement ADUs, and those will be fairly common. Our comprehensive plan addresses ADUs from a couple of different standpoints, one being Rapid City wants to expand the variety of housing that's available to people. Rachel addressed it in her comments. Someone who wants to live in a neighborhood, they're not interested in a high-rise apartment. This is a way to diversify our housing stock. And then Chapter 4 of our comprehensive plan talks about different strategies that we can take for affordable housing. And while the city will not be involved in monitoring the prices of what these units end up on the market as, with them being smaller in nature, some of them in older homes, they can start to get at that kind of median income level. And we think that's a good thing. The action plan in the comprehensive plan specifically recommends that we remove barriers to housing diversity, and specifically that we allow for accessory dwelling units with criteria. And then in our more recent history, in September, the City Council adopted this resolution for a Rapid City affordable housing policy, directing the city to pursue providing as many practical and necessary strategies to promote affordable housing situations. And while accessory dwelling units will by no means be the solution to affordable housing, it's one small step that we can take and to provide some units within existing neighborhoods and new neighborhoods. So some of this is a recap, but this is a strategy in our comprehensive plan. Accessory dwelling units can appeal to a very broad segment of the population. In Rapid City, we're talking about seasonal workers, college students, I think traveling nurses too. There's a really great opportunity for traveling nurses to take advantage of units like this, particularly once they're sort of legalized within our system. These units are great for promoting multi-generational living and the ability to age in place. And for homeowners who are either struggling to make ends meet or who are wanting to provide another income source so that they can plan ahead for their future, that's another great element of how these units can help make our neighborhoods and our communities stronger. This is a map of Rapid City and the different zoning districts, the different residential zoning districts. We are recommending that where units fit the criteria that we have in place, which I'll talk about later, where that occurs, that these units would be allowed in all of the residential zoning districts. So, some neighborhoods may inherently have more barriers in place that you would need to get around because maybe the lot sizes are smaller, maybe the street widths aren't as wide. So that, that's something that could be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But generally, we're saying we want the opportunity for these units to be available in all neighborhoods across Rapid City. I do have a couple of examples down below there that are actual examples of ADUs from Rapid City in our historic district. And I think that's something that's important to bring up as we talk about this. That there are procedures in place for historic review when you're talking about exterior modifications to buildings, and we have accounted for that in this policy to say that if you're a historic property and you want to add an ADU that's not already there, we want to look at any potential negative impacts, and that's part of the planning process. So just want to point that out. So the next series of slides is going to go through the criteria in our ordinance, starting with the definition of an ADU, which is that it's a subordinate dwelling unit, has its own cooking, sleeping, and sanitation facilities. And what's really important about this definition is that they're required to have a permanent foundation. So we're not talking about an RV that you pull into your backyard. We're not talking about tiny homes that are still on their wheels that could just come and go and be transient in and out of neighborhoods all the time. Occupancy. We are requiring within this ordinance that one of the 2 units be owner occupied according to the Pennington County tax assessment rules. And this is something that members of neighborhoods generally are most comfortable with this requirement because it lends that sort of permanent oversight. There's someone there that sees what's going on with the property and is there to make sure that maintenance and upkeep are occurring. So this is something that not all communities require as part of their ADU requirements, but something that for Rapid City introducing this now at this time, that this is kind of what we're most comfortable with, is requiring this owner occupancy. I already touched on this earlier, but we are suggesting that any residential zoning district where you can meet the requirements would be an appropriate zoning district. You know, there are some neighborhoods that have covenants in place today that would restrict this use, and the city doesn't get involved in those private covenants, but some neighborhoods would also have restrictions that people would want to be aware of if a covenant said that this use was not allowed. There's a fairly large section in the ordinance that talks about area regulation. So, you know, what are the lot size, setbacks, height regulations that say this is what a single, generally low-density neighborhood looks like? And ADUs can fit in with those criteria. So we're saying that if you have a detached unit, you have to be in the backyard. You can't be in the front yard. Your lot coverage requirements are still going to fit in with what would otherwise be required, which is generally 30%. A detached ADU cannot cover more than 10% of the lot area, and if you want to or need to exceed that 10% area, you need to ask for a variance from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And if you have an ADU, an existing ADU on a lot that's less than 6,500 square feet, it must be internal to the home, not detached. So these are some criteria in place to make sure that these units will be compatible with neighborhoods. Along that note, residential character, we have a provision that says if your unit is exceeding 500 square feet, we can take a look at the appearance. And if we're finding that something is just, you know, bleakly out of character with a neighborhood and might cause problems, then we can kind of take a look at that and see whether there should be some changes made to the physical appearance of the unit. Parking is something that came up at a lot of the public meetings and particularly the neighborhood groups. We originally started with requiring 2 parking spaces for the ADU and have since reduced that to 1 as part of that kind of middle ground mentality. The primary structure must already provide 2 spaces, so we're talking about 3 off-street parking spaces that would need to be available in order for the ADU to be registered under our ordinance. We do know that there are a lot of ADUs in Rapid City. We don't know exactly how many there are. And so one question during this process was, how are existing units going to fit in with what our current codes are? If it's a unit that was constructed some time ago, it may not meet all of the current regulations. So this ordinance says that if you come in for a building permit, if you need to newly construct something or remodel something and need a permit, all of those standards come into play. However, if you have a unit that exists now, we're not going to require you to come up to code with everything that exists now. That's probably not going to be feasible financially or logistically for a lot of units that are already out there today and functioning just fine. And as I mentioned before, there are procedures for historic preservation in the historic district. This was another question that came up was, you know, well, what happens when these units are used for short-term rentals? And our zoning code currently has procedures in place for what's more traditional bed and breakfast, but a lot of short-term rental uses that are kind of newer to our economies and newer to our communities are kind of a little bit of a different animal. We will be taking a look at specific regulations to address those, but what's important to highlight for this ordinance is that if you register under this ordinance, you are only to be using it for stays of 28 days or longer. So we're not allowing short-term rental use via this ordinance. And then as far as those units that are out there today, how do they go ahead and register in order to become legalized within our zoning code? Just a few things that have to be met. The definition, first of all, like you have to have that permanent foundation. You have to have separate eating, cooking, and sanitation facilities. You must be owner occupied, and you can only have 1 unit, and you have to meet the parking. But beyond that, for an existing unit, say your lot size is too small, say your setbacks are a few feet shy of what you need, we're not going to penalize people who have units that were built in 1940 to meet their current standards. That's a little bit too prohibitive, and we don't want to disincentivize people from registering those units. So these are kind of the bare minimum that must be met for an existing unit to register. And what are we asking for as far as registration? We'd like folks to submit a site plan and floor plan, show that they meet the requirements that I just showed on the previous slide, and there will be a small fee which will be set by the City Council. It hasn't been set yet. We expect this to be a nominal amount, just enough to account for the staff time to look at these plans. Maybe we've sort of talked internally about maybe $50, somewhere in there. We don't want it to be too cost prohibitive for folks to come in and register their units. And that's more for the online viewers to kind of take. These are sort of the frequently asked questions about ADUs. But I hope we've kind of given an overview of kind of the basics of, you know, how we've arrived at these, and we've tried to address concerns from neighborhoods. Like Ken said, we've had several neighborhood meetings and have really attacked this from several angles and tried to kind of find that middle ground where we could. So we are available for questions and are recommending approval of this ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Hensel. The chair recognizes Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Rachel for coming, because one of the questions when I was doing the research, knowing that this was coming before us today, was the Planning Commission's 6-3, and that answered a lot of it. If I could ask Sarah a question or two. Thanks, Sarah. So one of the mentions that you had is that this was in existence, you know, wartime, and it was a housing opportunity at that time when it was needed, but then it was removed or historically dissolved. What were the reasons for that? Why was it historically dissolved?
Just the rise of single-family ownership, kind of, and that excluding multifamily living situations from single-family neighborhoods. That just became popular among our society.
So instead of keeping it in place, we just removed the opportunity for those times then? I mean, it should still be there, I would think, unless there was a problem.
Madam Chair?
If I could ask Vicki.
Of course.
Thank you.
So Sarah's comment was nationwide that was the trend, but here in Rapid City, our first ordinance was adopted in 1935, and no, I wasn't working here then. However, we never had it be a provision within our ordinance from the get-go that ADUs were a part of what we had in Rapid City. They did exist, and many of them existed before our 1968 regulations, where we actually looked at mandating the number of units on each lot. So several of them are legal nonconforming. Several of them today are not legal. Our hope is that we can get them legal, ensuring that they meet some minimum design standards so they minimize the impact to the neighborhood.
And on code enforcement side, because there has to be some enforcement, how are we going to offset that when we already tax our code enforcement with the workload that we give them now, and now add to that? We're not increasing staff. Where are we going to do that? Because we've got a fine system there, but we would need to be able to, if a resident called and had a problem with an existing ADU, be able to enforce the code. What's the plan there?
Madam Chair? So, as I noted, we do have several ADUs that are existing today. It is not something that code enforcement currently receives a lot of calls on. And they're not here to speak. I suppose if there was a new tenant and they were loud, that call may come in and that would be pursued. But overall, they're not an issue. When we look at new ADUs that would come forward, we would look at occupancy, location, parking, size. Those would be a part of what we would be reviewing before we issue that registration. Then, similar to any residential structure, whether it be a bed and breakfast, a single-family home, several of those calls, if they were for noise or being obtrusive, those would go to the police. In other instances where someone wanted to call to say, hey, did this get registered, we would get those phone calls, we would pursue it. In this regulation, it is set up so that if we do receive those calls, our director can suspend that ADU registration. That property owner, if they feel it's unfair, can appeal that to council.
Next question. Thank you. I had that as the next question, is where the appeal process would come to, where the filing would be, so that's great. Now, can I ask another question to wrap this up with Chief Seals?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So Chief, I'm glad you're here to speak. So on behalf of the fire department, as we look at this, and there could be, because this is something new and possibly approved by the council, have a little mini explosion of opportunity. Are we ready on the safety side?
Yeah, we've been part of the process of the ADU and have given our input throughout the whole process, so yeah.
So you're ready to go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for probably Vicki in this case. Vicki Fisher, please. Can you speak to the registration timeline as well? I think that's something that hasn't been touched on very much, but as soon as the ordinance goes into place and start everything that's associated with this ordinance, the timeline, how long before they have to get registered?
So once the ordinance is in place and the council establishes a fee, whatever it is that you determine should be collected for that registration application, then it would, let me just get this straight, Richie, you're wanting to know how long before someone would have to get registered?
Like the enforcement
Thank
side
you.
of it kicks in, yes.
So for existing ADUs, we want them to be registered within that first 2 years. We would encourage them to get registered immediately, but there are some provisions they don't have to meet, like location and size. Those are things that they can't make happen. So we're saying that if you become registered within 2 years and become legal, then there are provisions you don't have to meet. If they don't meet that 2-year window, then it would become not a legally permitted use, and that would put them in violation of the code. Then when they came in, they would have to make provisions to meet the code, or anyone, new, existing, that doesn't meet it based on this ordinance would have to seek a variance from Zoning Board of Adjustment. We wrote in at the direction of one of our work sessions with council that if they're not meeting all of the criteria, that it is an automatic variance before council, and the director does not have the authority to grant exceptions.
Thank you. And the next question I've got is, you spoke about the legal part of this, being illegal, but you're using some other language as determination, so it's not illegal, it's another language that we've been using.
So we're being creative. Maybe Ken would assist us
Okay.
in this.
All right. Mr. Young?
Well, it's a term that I brought from my previous experiences. It's not expressly permitted. So we don't want people to feel like they're illegal.
Thank you.
But there is a difference between meeting the standards of the law, which is legal, and being outside of that, which is illegal, but a softer term is not expressly permitted.
I think that's an important point. Thank you. The other question I have for any one of the staff here is that if the owner moves out, we don't do any tracking on that, correct? If the owner occupied leaves, and so we don't track that.
That is correct. And that is typical of any other residential structure that we have in Rapid City, and that's where the long arm of government can be invasive. So there too, if it's going to be owner occupied and they should move out,
Yes.
and we receive a complaint from a neighbor, that gives us the ability to suspend it and eventually revoke it if they don't abide by the regulations.
Thank you. That helps clarify that. And then a little wonky question for you is on item G3, it talks about the primary dwelling unit size of a detached. It has to be smaller than the primary dwelling. But is that true with when it is not detached, or it is attached, I should say? So the size then can fluctuate, or could you clarify that?
So the owner can live in either the smaller unit or the larger unit.
As long as it's
it's
attached.
either way, even if it's detached. We have some people waiting for this ordinance to come forward that are going to actually live in the smaller ADU and build up the finances where they then can move into the larger unit and potentially get rid of the ADU. So when it's internal to the building, then the impact of the neighborhood doesn't have the same influence. So whether one is larger or smaller, since the owner can live in either one, the smaller unit or the larger unit, that becomes moot. But if it is detached, then it must be smaller. If it's beyond 500 square feet, it must look in the same residential character as the single-family home that's there.
So there's no objection to the owner living in the detached unit. I want to make sure everybody understands that as well. So, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Good, because you're out of time. Chair recognizes Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Questions for, I suppose, Vicki Fish or legal, I'm sure, but
Go ahead.
it's Vicki. So you presented that you know there's existing units. We don't know exactly the number of that. Do we have any estimate at all of how many existing units you might have out there?
I would be reluctant to guess.
Okay. My question is how does this affect like non-conforming duplexes? Is that part of this? I assume they're attached, like the up and down duplexes that you have sometimes. Will that allow these to go forward then, to be sold or used as a duplex, as an investment property for a bank? Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Madam Chair, I think I do. So there may be a structure on a property that currently is functioning as a duplex, but the owner lives in one of the units, and maybe the lot size isn't quite big enough, or maybe it's low-density residential zoning instead of medium-density residential zoning. That would give them the opportunity to bring that structure into compliance.
Okay. And then, once again, I know you don't know the exact number, but given the restrictions and the sizes of the lot and coverage and everything else, do we have any idea how many existing neighborhood units, in the existing neighborhoods? I understand this is for like, probably will work better for new developments, but your existing neighborhoods right now, any idea how many units we can add doing this, or how many ADUs could be built possibly?
So our provision is that you have to have a minimum 6,500 square foot lot
Right.
in order to do this. So looking at that, a majority of the older homes would, but there are other things that are going to limit it. This is
Right.
not meant to fit everywhere.
No, that's what I'm getting at, I guess, is it just, you can't, I guess it isn't just this overwhelming influx of ADUs out there in Rapid City, but do you have to have separate water and sewer lines for the individual units, or can they be tied directly into the mains from the house?
They want one service line so that the owner remains responsible
Okay.
for it.
That's a good point. It's good, less expensive, obviously. And then parking. The parking's one of my biggest concerns with this. I understand we always have a parking issue, and obviously you hear these problems all the time. I tend to think that we are a little too harsh with our parking in this town because people just find a place to park. But in the majority of cities you go to, you'll see that. And I understand we're trying to control the chaos of that, but I think it makes it more restrictive when you say you have to have a minimum of one, because I know you have your criteria, of course, but one parking lot, so with that, how do you do that? Can you explain how you arrive at that number?
Well, noting that one of the accessory dwelling unit by common standard is typically much smaller than the single-family home. That is usually a college student, a young professional. We don't see families utilizing those. And remember, there is in all residential districts a requirement that there be street parking. They can park in that street, but they cannot count it towards the 3 that are required for the off-street parking for the accessory dwelling unit and the single-family home.
Okay, I'm sorry, when I was at the planners thing the other day, I thought we said that the one parking unit could be used for this. Was that for tiny homes, or was that for ADUs?
That was for tiny homes.
Okay, I apologize.
But thanks for listening for that.
No, but I was confusing the two. Yeah, I was paying attention, believe it or not.
Were.
For once. Anyway, and then also one thing that I've fought for this before, and I will say it again, and I appreciate all your work. I understand this is definitely a process everybody's trying to go through. I have a problem with the short-term rental thing, because I think Airbnbs are the way of the future. They've been, not the way of the future, they're here now, and we've been doing it, and to say they can't use their property for that, I don't know. I understand the feeling is there's going to be a huge, massive amount of Airbnbs throughout the city, and people are going to be taking over neighborhoods. I just don't see that happening. That's why I was asking about that's my original question, what the existing number was about originally. I don't know. That's one of my biggest hangups is the short-term rental thing, and I understand that's addressing concerns of the neighborhoods around there and trying to make the neighbors happy. But I see the city constantly throwing up roadblocks to progress in that regard. The the scooters and the sidewalks. I mean, not the ones that can kill you. I don't like those ones when downtown Denver. I'm for that idea, but you know, the segways and things like that. I just think that we overregulate too much. We look for solutions to problems that really aren't existing. I don't know. That's my personal opinion. And then the 500 square foot rule for residential. Once again, and a lot of these things are covered by covenants too, folks, just so you know. But it kind of becomes a subjective thing to say this is not residential in its appearance. I don't know how you really decide that. It has to fit the neighborhood.
Yeah, it is subjective. We looked at language from other ordinances saying that the subordinate unit must match the primary structure. That seems pretty cost prohibitive. What if you don't particularly like the architectural character of the primary? I mean, so we kind of left it somewhat
Intentionally
open so
vague.
that we can kind of see whether it's an issue or not. And
I can
respond.
appreciate that. That's good. Thank you for clearing that up for me. There's no time limits in committees. You guys, believe me, I sit in this committee with you guys. I know this. But also, the one other thing I have in here is the definition of family. Well, I was trying to find that ordinance, and I didn't have time to look it up on my phone, but what is the definition of family according to the ordinance it referenced? I'm sorry.
So for the purposes of this, a family, if you're related by blood, there's no limitation to the number of people that can live in a dwelling if you're all family.
Right.
But if you're unrelated, then it's a maximum of 5.
Okay. That's just why I'm going to make sure we weren't, discriminating against families that are, there's all kinds of families this day and age. If you look at, all kind of different definitions. So I just want to make sure that's understood, that that's not what we're doing here. If you read this ordinance and you see that. But my biggest hang up, I guess, is the Airbnb situation, just because I'm more of a, I'm trying to push this into the 21st century. But I don't think this is going to be the issue that people are worried about. And I see it as going forward for new developments to be great. I don't see a big influx of these in the city. I do appreciate the affordable housing part of it. I just don't quite understand why we're, restricting, why we're making people register them. That's just my own personal hang up with it, but I'll wait till Monday night to decide how I'm going to vote for sure. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with a couple questions. So one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about the initial dwelling units and safety, when they go to register these ADUs, will they be assigned an address so that we can find them? That's part of the process. I didn't see that really lined out for me, so.
Yeah, I should have clarified that more directly. The units, when they register, are required to have a separate address. So they will be 2 distinct units so that emergency services will know which address they're responding to.
Okay, great. And then also, with the historic review in the historic district, who's responsible for that? Who does that? Is it the Historic Preservation Commission? Is it you guys? Who's doing that?
It depends on the project. We start with an administrative review using the criteria and the process that's established in state law and our local ordinance. So it's generally me, but there are other staff members here at the city who also perform historic reviews. And then in instances when there's maybe some eyebrows raised or some concerns that it's not meeting the standards, then the Historic Preservation Commission and sometimes even the City Council gets involved.
Well, I really like finding a way forward for all of these, for these dwelling units for a number of reasons, including what Rachel said earlier, and I appreciate everyone's comments. And I think this is a really big deal for Rapid City. This can't be passed over lightly, and I appreciate all the conversation we've had from the committee today and the questions, because it will change our city, and it will also bring in a lot of different ways that we can house people, and that's important for us as we're growing. So I'm very excited about this as a way forward. Is it perfect? No, but I think there's a lot of good things here, and I'd like to see it go forward. That's about all I can say as chair, but I really appreciate the discussion and thoughtful questions from the committee. So Chair recognizes Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion
Go ahead.
to approve first reading and introduction of the ordinance number 6310.
Second.
Moved by Modrick to approve, second by Nordstrom. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And we get approval on the ADUs. Wow, that's huge, guys. So we'll see what happens on Monday night. This isn't a done deal, so thank you for your time, ladies. Thank you for your work, Kenyon. We're not done. Okay, we're going to 16, approve rapid transit system, RTS procurement policy per Federal Transit Administration regulations. Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In an effort to try to get this up to 1 hour, I have a couple of questions. This is one of the longest committee meetings I've sat in for quite some time. So this question probably goes to the city attorney to start with. No, let me change my mind. Let me ask Megan, or is it Dale Tech that you want to handle this, or Megan? And I'll have you introduce yourself to the group here.
Megan Gould, Rapid Transit Division Manager.
Thank you, and thank you for doing the fine job that you're doing over there at the bus depot. It's I don't know, most days I get over there, it's somewhat entertaining, so thank you for what you do. In this process that we're changing here now, this policy that we're going to be putting in place, for you, how much, well, and your staff as well, how much time is going to be involved in doing all of this work? For me, it looks like additional work that's going to be placed on you. How much time?
Actually, nothing's going to change. This is a policy that's always been in place. These are things that we've always followed in previous procurements that we've conducted. Basically, what's changed is that the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, conducts a triennial review, and within the procurement policy and regulation that they have made it a mandate that every organization has a written policy in place. So basically what we've done is we've taken the policy that we've always followed and gone through with and put it in writing, so that if for some reason somebody has to come in and take over or do something along those lines, there's something in place that is followed by everyone within. So there's no change, there's no extra work, it's just now in written form.
That explains several other items that I've got to follow up with. So the bids and the council process is still, won't change?
Nope.
The telephone quotes, can you explain that just briefly, how that works? I understand that won't change either?
No, that won't change. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the telephone quotes is a portion of the procurement. So for example, if we were to go and purchase a bus, we can contact vendors that have either one utilized in the past or are larger vendors that are used throughout the nation, and just provide information, ask them information, and they can provide it to us exactly of, you know, we're looking at this type of bus, what are they running these days? So that when we go out and place the bids and do our procedures that are in place, we can have a generalized idea of how much it's going to cost.
Thank you. And let's see, and the micro purchase, we had a little earlier discussion on micro purchases. Can you speak to that as well, this, in your policy?
Basically, the micro purchases are close, within this policy, they're close to the same as what the city currently follows. The actual maximum amount of a micro purchase through the FTA is $10,000.
Oh.
Within this actual policy that we've written with the help with the city attorney's office is we've actually matched those numbers with what the city follows. So the FTA, anything under $10,000 is considered a micro purchase. Within the city, obviously that's a lot less. So we've went with the city's requirements. With micro purchases, we basically just have to prove to the FTA that we are being fair across the board. So if we have to go buy pens, we're taking quotes or looking online to see who has the cheapest pen and who's, if we're being fair about it.
Or paper clips, yes. Yep.
However it may be.
Yep. And then going out for bids, the advertising process, right now, I don't see that much, at least I don't see that much coming from the bus depot as far as advertising. The little bit that I've seen is like for the benches and so on, but essentially that won't change either.
No.
Yep, so that's all stays in place.
Correct. Everything will stay the same. Like I said, it's just written instead of in someone's mind, knowing what to do.
Thank you. I'm 5 minutes shy of 1 hour, so we tried. I yield.
Move to approve by Lehman, second by Lewis. All in favor? Aye. And all opposed? And the motion is approved. Let's see here. I get a motion to adjourn. Moved by Lewis, second by Lehman. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.